The judge's laughter cut through the courtroom like a blade through silk, unexpected, sharp, and impossible to ignore. I watched my mother-in-law's face freeze mid-sentence, her mouth still forming the words, "gold digger," as Judge Samuel Carter leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with something between amusement and disgust. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice carrying that particular Atlanta drawl that somehow made every word sound like both a question and a statement, "I think you might want to hear what your son actually wrote before you continue embarrassing yourself in my courtroom." The air shifted. I felt it in my chest, first that hollow space where my heart used to beat steady before Marcus died. Before his mother decided that grief wasn't enough, that she needed to destroy me too. 3 weeks. That's how long I'd been a widow. 3 weeks since I kissed my husband goodbye before his morning run. Since the police came to my door with their practiced sympathy. Since I learned that a drunk driver doesn't care about your plans or your promises, or the fact that you were finally building something beautiful. Evelyn Brooks sat ramrod straight in her tailored navy suit, her lawyer's hand hovering near her elbow, as if he might need to catch her. She'd spent the last 15 minutes painting me as a calculating seductress who'd trapped her precious son, stolen him from his rightful place in Atlanta's black elite, drained his resources, and now had the audacity to show up claiming I deserved anything from his estate. The gallery behind us filled with Marcus's relatives, colleagues, and half the congregation from Ebenezer Baptist had murmured their agreement. Some had even nodded. I sat there and taken it. Every word, every insinuation, because that's what you do when you've spent your entire adult life proving you belong in spaces that weren't built for girls from Bankhead Courts. You take it, you breathe through it, and you remember that your dignity isn't up for debate. But then she said it, gold digger, like I was some character in a rap song, like the 4 years I spent loving her son, supporting his dreams, holding him when the business struggled, celebrating every contract he won, like none of that was real, like I wasn't real. And the judge laughed, not at me, at her. "Your Honor, I object." Evelyn's attorney started, but Judge Carter raised one hand, and the room fell silent. He reached for the document on his desk, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or justice. "No, counselor, I don't think you do want to object. Not to this." He adjusted his reading glasses and looked directly at me for the first time since the hearing began. His expression softened, just slightly, and I saw something in that moment that made my throat tight. "Respect. Mrs. Thompson-Brooks, I apologize for what you've had to endure this morning, but I promise you, it's about to make sense." My mother-in-law's perfectly composed face cracked, just a fraction, and I realized, sitting in that courtroom in Fulton County, surrounded by people who'd already decided I was guilty, that Marcus had known. He'd known this would happen. He'd known his mother would never accept me, never see me as anything but an intruder in her carefully curated world. And he'd planned for it. The judge opened the will, and I held my breath, because I knew that whatever came next would change everything. Before I continue, I need to know where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. This story is for everyone who's ever been underestimated, judged, or told they don't belong. Let me know you're here. The day we buried Marcus, Atlanta decided to show off. The sky stretched blue and cloudless, the kind of perfect October afternoon that makes you believe in new beginnings even when you're standing at an ending. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood beside the casket, watching them lower my husband into red Georgia clay while 300 people, who barely knew him, pretended to mourn. I'd chosen a simple black dress that morning, nothing designer, nothing flashy. My locks were pulled back in a low bun, my makeup minimal except for the lipstick Marcus's favorite shade. A deep burgundy he always said made me look like royalty. I wore his grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones he'd given me on our wedding day, with shaking hands and tears in his eyes, whispering, "Now you're really family." His family didn't see it that way. Evelyn Brooks stood across from me, positioned perfectly for the photographers from the Atlanta Daily World. She wore black too, but hers was different, designer, structured, accessorized with the kind of jewelry that whispered old money, even though I knew the truth. The Brooks family had made their fortune in the last generation, just like Marcus was building his, but Evelyn moved through the world as if her ancestors had founded the city itself. She hadn't spoken to me directly since Marcus died, not at the hospital when I arrived, not during the wake, not when I tried to discuss funeral arrangements. She communicated through her sister, through Marcus's cousin, through anyone who would serve as a buffer between her grief and my existence. I told myself it was shock, that she needed time, that no mother should have to bury her son. I was wrong. The service at historic Ebenezer Baptist Church had been beautiful, painful but beautiful. Pastor Williams spoke about Marcus's generosity, his vision, his commitment to building up the community. He mentioned our marriage once, a brief acknowledgement that made Evelyn's jaw tighten. I'd felt it from 3 rows away, that disapproval radiating like heat. Now at the burial, people clustered in small groups across the cemetery lawn, their voices a low hum of condolences and gossip. I recognized faces from Marcus's firm, from the Chamber of Commerce, from the Jack and Jill chapter. Evelyn had tried to force us to join. These were Atlanta's black elite, doctors, lawyers, business owners who'd fought their way into boardrooms and country clubs, who'd built wealth and status and weren't about to let anyone forget it. I didn't fit their mold. I'd never tried to. Natasha appeared at my elbow, my best friend since college, my attorney now. I'd told her 100 times I didn't need legal representation at a funeral. She wore her natural hair in a high puff, her black suit sharp but modern, her eyes scanning the crowd with the same alertness she brought to every courtroom. You should leave. Now. I'm not running from my husband's burial, Tasha. I'm not asking you to run. I'm asking you to avoid what's about to happen. She nodded toward Evelyn, who was moving through the crowd with purpose, her sister flanking her like a bodyguard. She's been talking to people, building a narrative. About what? About you, about the business, about Marcus's money. Tasha's voice dropped lower. She's been telling people you manipulated him, that you isolated him from his family, that you're the reason he was stressed before the accident. The words hit me like physical blows. That's insane. Marcus and I were happy. We were, I know, but she's convincing. And these people want to believe her because it's easier than accepting that tragedy is random. Tasha gripped my arm gently. Please, let me take you home. But it was too late. Evelyn had reached us, and the crowd had noticed, conversations dying mid-sentence as everyone turned to watch. This was the show they'd been waiting for, the confrontation between the grieving mother and the questionable wife, Maya Thompson. She used my maiden name deliberately, erasing the Brooks that Marcus had been so proud to share with me. I need to speak with you. I straightened my spine, channeling every lesson my grandmother had taught me about holding your head high when the world wants to see you bow. Mrs. Brooks, I'm so sorry for your loss, for our loss. Our loss. Her voice carried across the quiet cemetery. You've known my son for 4 years. I carried him for 9 months, raised him for 35 years. And sacrificed everything to give him the opportunities that made him successful. Don't pretend your grief equals mine. The crowd pressed closer, phones appearing in hands, recording this moment for their group chats and social media. I saw the calculation in Evelyn's eyes. She knew exactly what she was doing, staging this confrontation with witnesses, creating a public record of her accusations. I'm not comparing grief, I said carefully. I'm just saying that I loved Marcus too, that I'm mourning him too. You loved his money. She spat the words like poison. You saw a successful black man building an empire, and you latched on. You came from nothing. Bankhead Courts, wasn't it? Community college before you scraped together some scholarships, and somehow you convinced my son that you were worth abandoning his community, his family, his future for it. The Bankhead reference was strategic. She was reminding everyone of my background, the poverty I'd clawed my way out of, the neighborhood that Atlanta's elite loved to reference when they wanted to prove they cared about those people while keeping their own children far away. I came from a neighborhood, not nothing, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. And Marcus never abandoned anyone. He built a business that employed 30 people, that renovated affordable housing, that gave back to the community he loved. Our community, the community you convinced him to waste resources on instead of building generational wealth. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice rising. He was supposed to take over Brooks and Associates, to expand the firm my father built. Instead, he started his own company at Jersey, poured money into projects that barely broke even because you filled his head with ideas about giving back and staying authentic. Tasha moved to intervene, but I touched her arm, stopping her, because I suddenly understood what was happening. This wasn't about grief or family legacy. This was about control. Evelyn had spent 3 decades molding Marcus into her vision of success, and I'd come along and shown him there were other ways to measure worth. Marcus made his own choices, I said quietly. He was brilliant and capable and didn't need anyone manipulating him. He built exactly the life he wanted, with you spending his money, living in the house he bought, driving the car he purchased, wearing the jewelry he provided. Evelyn's eyes fixed on the pearls at my ears, and I saw her recognize them, her mother's pearls. The family heirloom she'd never approved of Marcus giving away. You used my son for money, Maya. You trapped him with your poverty story and your humble act, and now he's dead. And you're standing here pretending to be the grieving widow when everyone knows what you really are. The word hung unspoken between us, but everyone heard it anyway. Gold digger. The accusation that follows ambitious women, especially black women, who dare to marry men with resources. Never mind that I'd built my own business, that I'd supported Marcus when his first 3 projects failed, that I'd loved him when he was stressed and scared and unsure if he could make it work. Mrs. Brooks, I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts, I don't want to fight with you. Not here. Not today. Can we please just what? Pretend you didn't take advantage of my son. Pretend you deserve anything from his estate. She turned to address the crowd now, performing for the jury of her peers. This woman has been living off Marcus for 4 years. Now she's trying to claim his assets, his property, everything he worked for. But I won't let her. Marcus was my son before he was her husband, and I will protect his legacy from people like her. People like her. The phrase echoed across the cemetery, and I felt the weight of every judgment, every assumption, every stereotype that had followed me my entire life. The girl from the projects who should be grateful for scraps, the scholarship student who didn't really belong at Spelman, the entrepreneur who must have slept her way to success because her business couldn't possibly be legitimate. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. What could I say that would matter? These people had already decided who I was. They'd decided at the moment Marcus introduced me to his mother 4 years ago, when Evelyn had looked me up and down and asked, "And where is your family from?" in a tone that really meant, "How did you get past security?" Tasha finally stepped forward, her lawyer voice crisp and professional. "Mrs. Brooks, this is neither the time nor the place for these accusations. If you have concerns about your son's estate, there are proper legal channels that will expose exactly what she is." Evelyn interrupted. "I've already filed a contest. We'll see what a judge has to say about her claims when the truth comes out." She turned on her heel and walked away, her entourage following like she was Queen of Atlanta, leaving me standing beside my husband's grave, with 300 witnesses to my humiliation. The crowd dispersed slowly, their voices rising as soon as they thought they were out of earshot. I caught fragments of conversations, always seemed too good to be true. I heard she maxed out his credit cards, Marcus's mama knows best, and felt my carefully constructed composure crack. Tasha pulled me close, shielding me from the phones still recording. "Let's go," she whispered. "You don't owe these people anything." But as we walked toward the parking lot, I looked back one last time at Marcus's grave, at the man who'd loved me despite his mother's objections, who'd chosen me over her approval, who'd promised me that we'd build something beautiful together, and I wondered if he'd known, even then, that this day would come. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after I buried my husband. I'd been sitting at my kitchen table, Marcus's kitchen table. I reminded myself, since apparently everything I touched was really hissing at a stack of sympathy cards I couldn't bring myself to open. The mail slot rattled, and I heard the soft thud of envelopes hitting the hardwood floor of our foyer, my foyer. I didn't know anymore. Since the funeral, I'd existed in a strange liminal space where everything familiar felt foreign. The house Marcus and I had renovated together, stripping wallpaper on weekends, debating paint colors, laughing as we installed light fixtures at midnight because we couldn't wait for the electrician, now felt like a museum to a life that had ended. I walked through rooms we'd filled with love and saw only evidence of my alleged crimes. The design studio sat untouched. I'd cancelled all my client meetings the week Marcus died, and I hadn't found the energy to reschedule. My business, the one I'd built before I even met Marcus, the one I'd grown through 16-hour days and endless networking, felt like a lie now. Because if Evelyn was right, if everyone believed her story, then nothing I'd accomplished was real. It was all just the fruits of manipulation. I padded to the front door in Marcus's old Morehouse sweatshirt and leggings, my lokes unwashed and piled on top of my head. The mail was mostly bills and more sympathy cards, but one envelope stood out, thick, cream, with an official seal from the Fulton County Superior Court. My hand shook as I opened it. Notice of will. Reading an estate contest, the words swam on the page, legal jargon that Tasha would need to translate, but the core message was clear. Evelyn Brooks was formally contesting Marcus's will. The reading was scheduled for Friday, 9 a.m., before Judge Samuel Carter. All interested parties were required to appear. I called Tasha immediately. "I've been expecting this," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Evelyn filed the contest 3 days ago. I got the notice yesterday but wanted to review everything before we talked." "Review what?" "Marcus and I had our wills done together 2 years ago. Everything was straightforward." "It is straightforward. That's why Evelyn's contest won't hold up." "But she's not trying to win legally, Maya. She's trying to win publicly." I heard papers shuffling on Tasha's end. "She's claiming undue influence, that you isolated Marcus from his family, that he wasn't in his right mind when he made the will, that there are financial irregularities she wants investigated." Financial irregularities. I sank into the nearest chair, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. We had joint accounts. Everything was transparent. Marcus handled the business finances. I handled the household and my studio. "I know, and when we go to court, we'll prove all of that. But right now, Evelyn is building a narrative for her community. She's telling everyone who listened that you're a con artist, that Marcus was a victim, that she's the only one protecting his legacy." Tasha paused. "Have you checked social media?" I hadn't. I'd deleted all the apps the day after the funeral, unable to face the comments and speculation. "Why don't just trust me, don't look. It's mostly people who don't know you repeating Evelyn's talking points. But Maya, there are also people defending you. Some of Marcus's colleagues from the firm, clients from your studio, folks who actually knew you both. This isn't as one-sided as Evelyn wants you to think, but it felt one-sided when I was alone in this house, surrounded by memories and ghosts and the growing certainty that I'd lost more than my husband. I'd lost my place in the world we'd built together. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Show up Friday, dress professionally but not expensive. We don't want to feed into the gold digger narrative. Bring copies of your business records, tax returns for the last 4 years, and any documentation of your financial independence. We need to show that you didn't need Marcus's money because you had your own." The implication stung, even though I knew Tasha didn't mean it that way. This was the calculation that ambitious black women always faced. Prove you're successful enough to be taken seriously, but not so successful that you threaten male egos. Prove you don't need money, but don't be so independent that people question why you got married at all. "Tasha, I don't want to fight his mother in court. Marcus loved her, despite everything. He'd hate this. Marcus is dead." Her voice softened with sympathy, but the words were steel. "And Evelyn is using his death to destroy you. You don't have to fight for his money, hell. Give it all to charity if you want, but you need to fight for your reputation, because if you don't, her version of this story becomes the truth." After we hung up, I walked through the house, seeing it through new eyes. The furniture we'd picked out together at estate sales and vintage markets. Would a judge see that as evidence of my frugality or my manipulation? The art on the walls, mostly from black artists Marcus loved to support, with that look like cultural appreciation or calculated performance. In the bedroom, I opened the closet and stared at Marcus's clothes, still hanging exactly where he'd left them. His favorite suit, the charcoal gray one he wore to important meetings, his Morehouse hoodie collection, representing every year he'd gone back for homecoming, his sneakers, arranged in neat rows, because he was particular about his shoes, in a way that always made me laugh. I pulled out one of his t-shirts and pressed it to my face, breathing in the fading scent of his cologne, and I let myself cry for the first time since the funeral. Not the quiet, dignified tears I'd shed in public, but the ugly, gasping sobs of someone who'd lost everything, and was only now realizing the full extent of the damage. Marcus and I had met at a networking event for black entrepreneurs 4 years ago. I'd been pitching my design studio to potential investors, armed with a portfolio and desperation because my savings were running out. He'd approached me after my presentation with that easy smile and said, "You know what you're doing is revolutionary, right? Creating beautiful, affordable spaces for people who've been told they don't deserve beautiful things." I'd been ready to dismiss him as another smooth-talking man looking for an angle. But then he'd offered to introduce me to 3 of his clients who needed design work, and he'd never asked for anything in return. Not my number, not a date, not even a commission. He'd just wanted to help. It took him 3 months to ask me out, and when he finally did, he was nervous. This tall, confident, successful man had fumbled through, asking if maybe I'd want to grab coffee sometime, if I wasn't too busy, no pressure, unless I was seeing someone, in which case, forget he said anything. I'd said yes before he could talk himself out of it. Our first date lasted 8 hours. We'd started at a coffee shop in Sweet Auburn, moved to lunch at Busy Bee, then walked through the Oakland Cemetery, talking about our dreams and fears and all the ways we'd had to fight to get where we were. He told me about growing up as Evelyn's son, the pressure to be perfect, the exhaustion of constantly performing success. I told him about growing up in Bankhead, my mother's 3 jobs, the scholarship essays I'd written describing my poverty in just enough detail to be sympathetic but not so much that I seemed damaged. "I'm tired of performing," he'd said, as the sun set over the city skyline. "I want to build something real, something that matters." "Then do it," I'd said. "You're Marcus Brooks. You can do anything." He'd kissed me then, soft and sweet, and whispered, "I think I'm going to need you to remind me of that a lot." I'd reminded him every day for 4 years, through the scary decision to leave his mother's firm and start his own company, through the first project that nearly bankrupted him, through the nights he couldn't sleep because he was terrified of failing, of proving his mother right, of letting down everyone who believed in him. And I'd been there for the successes too. The first major contract, the awards, the articles in Atlanta Business Chronicle calling him one of the city's rising stars. I'd celebrated every victory like it was my own. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You become a student of their joy. But Evelyn had never seen any of that. She'd only seen a woman from Bankhead who'd somehow convinced her son to choose a different path than the one she'd planned. The days before the court hearing passed in a blur. Tasha came over to prepare me, drilling me on potential questions, reminding me to stay calm, to not let Evelyn provoke me. We organized documents and timelines, building a case for my character that felt absurdly clinical. Here's proof that Maya Thompson is a real person with real accomplishments, not a gold-digging phantom. Friends stopped by with food I couldn't eat and comfort I couldn't accept. My mother called from her new home in Florida, the one Marcus and I had helped her buy after 30 years of renting, her voice thick with worry. "Baby, you don't have to do this. You can walk away from all of it." But I couldn't walk away, not because I wanted Marcus's money. I'd sign over every penny if it would bring him back, but because walking away meant accepting Evelyn's story. It meant agreeing that I was the villain, that our love was a transaction, that everything we'd built was a lie. On Thursday night, I laid out my clothes for court, a simple navy dress, modest heels, minimal jewelry except for my wedding ring and Marcus's grandmother's pearls. I looked at myself in the mirror and practiced staying calm, keeping my face neutral, not reacting to whatever Evelyn might say. The Fulton County Superior Court building stood imposing against the Friday morning sky. All stone and glass and the weight of accumulated justice. I'd driven past it hundreds of times, never imagining I'd walk through those doors as a defendant of character, my entire life reduced to evidence for or against. Tasha met me on the steps, immaculate in a charcoal suit, her natural hair styled in a sleek twist-out that somehow looked both professional and defiant. She squeezed my hand once. "Solidarity, not pity," said. "Remember, you're not on trial. This is just a will reading that Evelyn is trying to turn into a circus." We walk in, we listen, we let the documents speak for themselves. "And if when she starts," Tasha corrected, "you stay quiet. You let me respond. You don't owe her your pain or your anger. She doesn't get that from you anymore." We pushed through the heavy doors into the cool, echoing lobby. Security, metal detectors, the particular smell of old buildings and new anxieties. I'd worn the navy dress as planned, my locks pulled into a professional bun, my makeup careful and neutral. I looked exactly like what I was, the woman who'd built her own success and didn't need to apologize for it. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate, wood paneling, rows of benches that could hold maybe 50 people. An elevated judge's bench that commanded respect through sheer architectural authority, and it was already filling up. Evelyn had brought an army. I recognized faces from the funeral, Marcus's cousins, family, friends, members of the various organizations Evelyn belonged to. They filled the right side of the room, a show of force that communicated exactly what she wanted the judge to see: community support, family unity, and a collective belief that I was the outsider who needed to be expelled. The left side was emptier. Tasha and I sat in the front row, and behind us, I was surprised to see a few familiar faces. James Chen, one of Marcus's business partners, who'd worked with him since the beginning. Angela Price, my first major client, who'd referred at least 15 people to my studio. 2 of Marcus's younger cousins who'd always been kind to me, who'd helped us move furniture and stayed for dinner and never seemed to buy into Evelyn's narrative. It wasn't much, but it was something. Evelyn entered like she was walking into a gala. Designer suit in dove gray, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive. Her attorney, a thin white man with silver temples and a briefcase that probably cost more than my car, flanked her right side. Her sister, Patricia, took the left, and together they moved to their seats with the coordination of a military operation. She didn't look at me, not once. I was beneath her notice now, irrelevant except as an obstacle to be removed. All rise for the Honorable Judge Samuel Carter. We stood as the judge entered, and I got my first real look at him. He was exactly as described in the legal papers, late 50s, black with graying hair and a beard that gave him the air of a wise uncle who'd seen too much nonsense to be impressed by any more. His robes were crisp, his expression unreadable as he settled into his seat and surveyed the room. His eyes lingered on the packed gallery, and I saw something flicker there, amusement, maybe, or recognition of the theater being staged. "Be seated," he said, his voice carrying that particular Atlanta inflection that could make an order sound like a suggestion, while leaving no doubt it was absolute. "Well, this is quite the turnout for what should be a straightforward will reading. Mrs. Brooks," he gestured to Evelyn, "your attorney filed a contest claiming undue influence and financial irregularities. That's a serious accusation. I hope you have serious evidence to support it." Evelyn's attorney stood, all professional polish and rehearsed gravitas. "Your Honor, we do. My client has documentation showing significant financial transfers from the deceased to Mrs. Thompson-Brooks, as well as witness testimony regarding the isolation of Mr. Brooks from his family during the last years of his life. We believe these factors demonstrate a pattern of manipulation that invalidates the current will." "And I'll stop you right there, Counselor." Judge Carter raised one hand, and the lawyer sat down so fast it was almost comical. "This is a will reading, not a trial. You'll get your chance to present evidence if I determine there's cause for a full hearing. Right now, I'm going to read the will that Mr. Marcus Brooks had properly executed, witnessed, and filed with this court. If, after hearing his wishes, you still want to contest, we can discuss next steps. But let's start with what the deceased actually wanted, shall we?" He opened the file on his desk, and the room fell silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and erratic in my ears. Tasha's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently, but before the judge could read, Evelyn stood. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not." "Mrs. Brooks, sit down." "Your Honor, please. I just want to make clear that my son was not himself when he made this will. That woman," she pointed at me, and I felt every eye in the room swiveled my direction. "That woman manipulated him, isolated him from his family, filled his head with ideas that went against everything he was raised to believe. Marcus was supposed to take over my father's law firm. He was supposed to build generational wealth, to elevate our family's status. Instead, he threw it all away on risky ventures and charitable projects that barely broke even. And why? Because she convinced him that was noble, that was authentic, that was more important than his family legacy." Judge Carter's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. "Mrs. Brooks, I understand you're grieving, but this is a courtroom, not a stage for your personal grievances. If you interrupt again, I'll hold you in contempt. Is that clear?" Evelyn sat, but she wasn't finished. I could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the table. She was building to something. That the judge began reading. The will was standard at first legal jargon about sound, mind, and body, the date it was executed, the attorney who'd witnessed it. Then he got to the specific bequests. "To my mother, Evelyn Brooks, I leave my gratitude for the opportunities she provided and the lessons she taught. I hope she will come to understand that success can be measured in more than money, and that legacy is about more than status." Evelyn's face went rigid. That wasn't a gift. It was a message, a gentle rebuke from beyond the grave. The judge continued, "To my business partners and employees, I leave instructions for the continuation of Brooks' development, including a transition plan and resources to ensure the company can thrive without me. I trust them to continue our mission of creating affordable, quality housing in underserved communities." Marcus's voice echoed in every word. I could hear him saying these things, explaining his vision, his hopes. "To my wife, Maya Thompson-Brooks." Objection. Evelyn's attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, This is exactly what we're contesting. The deceased left everything to a woman he'd known for only 4 years, bypassing his family, his mother, the people who'd supported him his entire life. This demonstrates clear, undue influence, counselor. Sit down before I have you removed. Judge Carter's voice was quiet, but it cut through the courtroom like ice. I will read this will in its entirety, without further interruption. You can file whatever motions you want after, but right now, you will be silent. The lawyer sat, red-faced. Evelyn looked like she might combust from rage and humiliation. Judge Carter continued, to my wife, Maya Thompson-Brooks, I leave the following. Our home, at 2847 Peachtree Road, which we renovated together and filled with love. The house is hers, free and clear, with no strings attached. I also leave her 50% ownership in Brooks Development, not because she needs my money, she's built a successful business of her own, but because she believed in this company when no one else did, including my own family. She supported my vision, encouraged my risks, and deserves to benefit from our shared success. I couldn't breathe. Marcus had left me half the company. I'd thought maybe the house, maybe some savings, but this. Additionally, the judge read, I am establishing the Marcus Brooks Scholarship Fund with an initial endowment of $200,000 to be administered by my wife. This scholarship will provide full ride opportunities to HBCU-bound students from underserved communities in Atlanta. With a focus on entrepreneurship and community development, Maya will select the recipients and oversee the program, as she understands better than anyone the transformative power of education and opportunity. The gallery erupted. Evelyn's supporters murmured their disapproval, some shaking their heads, others whispering furiously. My small section was quieter, but I caught James Chen nodding, a small smile on his face. Ordered. Judge Carter's voice boomed. This is still my courtroom, and you will show respect or you will leave. The room settled, but the tension remained thick enough to choke on. Evelyn stood again, and this time, the judge let her speak. Your Honor, this proves our point. That scholarship, that was my idea. I suggested it to Marcus years ago as a way to honor my father's legacy, but she convinced him to put her in charge. To give her control of family money. Mrs. Brooks, the judge interrupted, and there was something new in his voice now. Irritation, yes, but also something sharper. Are you suggesting that your son, a 35-year-old man with a master's degree in engineering and a successful business, was incapable of making his own decisions? I'm suggesting he was influenced by a woman who saw an opportunity and took it. She came from nothing, Your Honor, nothing, and suddenly she's living in a house worth $500,000, driving a luxury car, wearing designer clothes, all on my son's dime. She isolated him from his family, from the people who truly cared about him, and now she's trying to take everything he worked for. The words hit me like bullets, each one carefully aimed. I wanted to stand, to defend myself, to tell everyone that the car was a used Honda, that the designer clothes came from consignment shops, that I'd contributed equally to our household expenses from my own business income. But Tasha's grip on my hand tightened, holding me in place. Are you finished? Judge Carter asked, his tone flat. No, Your Honor, I'm not. Evelyn's voice rose, playing to the gallery now, because there's more to this will, isn't there? And I want everyone in this room to hear how she manipulated my son into betraying his family. Mrs. Brooks, the judge said, and now I heard it clearly, the edge of warning in his voice. I'm going to ask you one more time to sit down, because what comes next in this will is not what you think it is. And if you keep talking, you're going to embarrass yourself in front of all these people you've brought as witnesses. But Evelyn was too far gone, too convinced of her righteousness. She's a gold digger, Your Honor, plain and simple. She saw a successful black man and she latched on. And now my son is dead, and she's here trying to take everything. The judge laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a sympathetic sound. It was a genuine laugh, short and sharp, that cut through Evelyn's tirade and stopped her mid-sentence. The entire courtroom froze. Mrs. Brooks, Judge Carter said, shaking his head slowly, I think you might want to hear what your son actually wrote before you continue embarrassing yourself in my courtroom. He picked up another document, and I saw Evelyn's face go pale as she realized there was something she didn't know about, something her attorney hadn't prepared her for. Mr. Brooks included a personal letter to be read aloud in the event of his death. It's addressed to his mother. The judge's eyes met Evelyn's, and for a moment, I saw something like pity there. Would you like me to read it privately, or shall I continue with this public reading you've orchestrated? Evelyn sank into her chair, and the room held its breath. Judge Carter held the letter up, and I could see Marcus's handwriting on the paper, even from where I sat, his distinctive, careful script that he'd insisted on using for important documents, because he said typing felt impersonal. My throat tightened. This was his voice, about to fill the room one last time. For the record, the judge said, this letter was written 6 months before Mr. Brooks's death. At the same time he updated his will. It was witnessed, notarized, and filed with explicit instructions that it be read aloud if anyone contested his estate. He looked directly at Evelyn. Your son knew this would happen, Mrs. Brooks. He knew you'd fight his wishes, and he left you a message anyway. Evelyn's attorney leaned over to whisper something, but she waved him away, her expression a mask of barely controlled fury. The gallery had gone completely silent, everyone leaning forward to catch every word. Judge Carter adjusted his glasses and began to read. To my mother, Evelyn Brooks, if you're hearing this letter, it means I'm gone, and you're in court fighting my will. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but we both know I'm not. You've spent my entire life telling me what success should look like, who I should be, what choices would make you proud. And for 30 years, I tried to be that person. I tried to fit into the mold you created, to live up to the Brooks legacy you were so determined to build. But then I met Maya. And she showed me that there are different ways to measure a life worth living. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears already streaming down my face. Tasha's arm came around my shoulders, holding me together. Maya didn't come from wealth or status. She came from struggle and determination. From a mother who worked 3 jobs and a neighborhood that Atlanta's elite love to ignore unless they're feeling charitable. But she built something anyway. She took her talent and her grit and her refusal to be diminished, and she created a business that brings beauty and dignity to people's lives. She did all of that before she ever met me. When I introduced Maya to you, Mom, I hoped you'd see what I saw, a woman of substance, intelligence, and grace. Instead, you saw her background and decided she wasn't good enough for your son. You questioned her motives, investigated her finances, warned me that I was making a mistake. You told me she'd ruin everything you'd worked to build. You were right, in a way. She did ruin something. She ruined my ability to pretend that money and status were the only things that mattered. She ruined my comfort with a business model that prioritized profit over people. She ruined my willingness to live a life that looked successful but felt empty. The judge paused, letting the words settle. I could see people in the gallery shifting uncomfortably, especially those who'd nodded along with Evelyn's accusations. Marcus's cousin Angela had tears on her face. James Chen was staring at the floor, his jaw tight. Evelyn sat frozen, her face completely blank, but her hands were trembling. If you're contesting this will, Mom, it's because you believe Maya manipulated me, that she stole me from my rightful place in your version of the Brooks legacy. So let me be absolutely clear. Every decision I made in the last 4 years was mine. The choice to leave Brooks and Associates and start my own firm. The decision to focus on affordable housing instead of luxury developments. The commitment to give back to communities that look like the ones both Maya and I came from. Maya didn't manipulate me. She freed me. She showed me that I could build wealth without abandoning my values, that I could be successful without sacrificing my integrity, that I could honor my roots while reaching for something better. The house I'm leaving her, we bought it together with money from both our businesses. We renovated it on weekends, learning how to lay tile from YouTube videos, laughing when we made mistakes. Every room holds memories we created as equal partners. The scholarship fund, that was Maya's idea, yes, but not because she was trying to control family money, because she believed that the best way to honor my success was to create opportunities for young people who remind her of who she used to be, who remind her that potential isn't determined by your zip code or your parents' bank account. Mom, I love you, but I need you to understand something. Maya didn't take me from you. You pushed me away by refusing to accept that your vision for my life wasn't the only valid one. You pushed me away by treating my wife with suspicion and contempt instead of welcoming her into our family. You pushed me away by making it clear that your approval came with conditions I wasn't willing to meet. Judge Carter's voice had softened as he read, the legal authority giving way to something more human, compassion for the complicated truth of family love and disappointment. If you're hearing this letter, I'm asking you to let go. Let go of your anger at Maya. Let go of your need to control my legacy. Let go of the belief that your way is the only right way. Maya is my wife. She was my partner in every sense of the word. And if you can't respect my choices, even in death, then you're the one betraying the Brooks legacy, because the family I came from was built on respect, dignity, and the belief that every person deserves to be judged on their character, not their circumstances. I hope someday you'll see what I saw in Maya. I hope you'll realize that she didn't diminish our family, she expanded it. But if you can't, if you're determined to fight her and tarnish her name and turn my death into a weapon against the woman I loved, then know this: you're not protecting my legacy. You're destroying it with love, despite everything. Marcus. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Carter set the letter down carefully, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. When he looked up, his expression was one of profound weariness. Mrs. Brooks, he said quietly, your son wrote this 6 months before he died. Not in some moment of crisis, not under duress, not while being manipulated. He wrote it knowing exactly what would happen, knowing you'd contest his will, knowing he needed to leave you a message you couldn't ignore or reinterpret. Evelyn's face had crumbled. The imperious certainty was gone, replaced by something raw and wounded. Her sister reached for her hand, but Evelyn pulled away. Your Honor, her attorney started, but the judge cut him off. Don't, please don't make this worse for your client than it already is. He turned to address the entire courtroom. I've been a judge for 23 years. I've read hundreds of wills, heard countless family disputes, watched people tear each other apart over money and property and the last wishes of the dead. But I have never, he emphasized the word, never seen someone so thoroughly refute their own parents' claims from beyond the grave. He picked up the will again. Mr. Brooks was meticulous. He documented everything. There are affidavits here from his business partners confirming that Mrs. Thompson-Brooks had her own successful design studio before they met. Bank records showing that she contributed equally to household expenses. Testimony from friends and colleagues that their marriage was built on mutual respect and genuine love. The judge looked directly at me for the first time since reading the letter. Mrs. Thompson-Brooks, I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry that you've had to defend your character in public because of unfounded accusations. Your husband's will is clear. His intentions are unambiguous, and there is zero evidence of undue influence or manipulation. He turned back to Evelyn, and his voice hardened. Mrs. Brooks, this contest is denied. Your son left his estate to his wife, as is his absolute right. If you choose to appeal, that's your prerogative. But I'm telling you now, you won't win. And if you continue this campaign to destroy your daughter-in-law's reputation, I'll consider it harassment and rule accordingly. Your Honor, please. Evelyn's voice broke, all the polish stripped away. He was my son, my only child, and she was his wife, Judge Carter said, not unkindly but firmly, his chosen partner, the person he loved and trusted enough to build a life with. And you've spent the week since his funeral trying to convince the world that their entire relationship was a fraud. How do you think that honors his memory? Evelyn had no answer. She sat there, diminished in her expensive suit, surrounded by her supporters who were now looking anywhere but at her. The judge gathered his papers. This matter is closed. Mrs. Thompson-Brooks, the estate will be transferred to you as specified in the will. If you need any documentation for the transition, my clerk will assist you. He looked around the courtroom one final time. And for everyone else who came here today expecting a show, I hope you learned something about the dangers of rushing to judgment based on gossip and prejudice. He stood, and we all stood with him. Court is adjourned. As he left, the gallery erupted into whispered conversations, people processing what they'd just witnessed, recalculating their positions, covering their tracks. I stood there, shaking, barely able to process that it was over. Tasha pulled me into a fierce hug. He knew, she whispered. Marcus knew exactly what she'd do, and he protected you. I looked across the aisle at Evelyn, who sat collapsed in her chair, her attorney packing up his briefcase with quick, embarrassed movements. Her sister was whispering urgently, but Evelyn seemed not to hear. She was staring at nothing, her face a map of grief and regret, and the terrible understanding of irreversible mistakes. For a moment, just a moment, I felt sorry for her. She'd lost her son and spent her grief trying to destroy the person he'd loved most. Now she had to live with the public knowledge that Marcus had seen it coming, had tried to stop it, and had chosen me anyway. But the sorrow passed quickly, replaced by exhaustion and relief, and the desperate need to leave this place. Let's go, I said to Tasha. As we moved toward the door, people tried to approach me, some to apologize, some to offer belated support, some just to be close to the drama. I kept my head high and my eyes forward, channeling every lesson my grandmother had ever taught me about dignity. Maya. A voice stopped me at the door. I turned to see James Chen, Marcus's business partner. I just wanted you to know. I knew about the letter, about his plans. He talked to me about it when he updated the will. He said he wanted to make sure you'd be protected, that you'd have what you needed to keep going. My eyes filled with fresh tears. Thank you for telling me. He loved you so much, James continued, more than I've ever seen anyone love anything. And he was happier in those 4 years with you than in all the time I knew him before. That counts for something. That counts for everything. I nodded, unable to speak, and Tasha guided me out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The courthouse steps felt like descending from a mountain peak, my legs unsteady, my ears still ringing with Marcus's words, my heart too full and too broken to make sense of anything. Tasha held my elbow, steering me past reporters who'd somehow gotten word of the hearing, past curious onlookers with their phones out, past all the noise that wanted to turn my grief into content. We made it to her car before I collapsed. Not physically, I remained upright, buckled in, presentable, but something inside me gave way. The adrenaline that had carried me through the hearing evaporated, leaving only the raw truth. Marcus was gone, and he'd known this would happen, and he'd spent his last months planning how to protect me from his own mother. He shouldn't have had to do that, I said, my voice hollow. He shouldn't have had to write a letter defending me, defending us, just in case he died and she tried to destroy me. What kind of love story ends with legal documents and courtroom showdowns? Tasha started the car but didn't drive, letting me process in the relative privacy of the parking garage. The kind where one person loves you so much, they plan for every contingency, even the unbearable ones. But the scholarship fund, Tasha, $200,000. I had no idea he'd set aside that much money. I had no idea he'd put me in charge of it. The responsibility felt crushing. What if I mess it up? What if I choose wrong? Or the program fails? Or, Maya. Tasha turned to face me fully. You've been giving back since before you had anything to give. You mentored design students at Spelman while you were building your studio. You offered free consultations to small business owners trying to make their spaces work. You volunteered at the community center in Bankhead, teaching kids about interior design as a career path. Marcus didn't give you that responsibility because he thought you'd be perfect. He gave it to you because he knew you'd care enough to try. We drove back to the house, in silence. But it was different now, not the heavy silence of dread, but the exhausted quiet of aftermath. When we pulled into the driveway, I stared at the house that was now officially, legally, undeniably mine. The house Marcus and I had made into a home. I'd been avoiding looking too closely at it since he died, afraid that really seeing it would make his absence too real. But now I let myself notice the details. The front porch we'd rebuilt together. Marcus teaching me how to use a circular saw while I taught him the difference between eggshell and matte paint. The window boxes I'd planted with herbs. Insisting we needed fresh basil even though Marcus joked that neither of us could cook well enough to justify it. The navy blue door, my choice that Marcus had initially resisted until he saw it finished and admitted I'd been right. Every inch of this place was us. Our arguments and compromises, our laughter and late nights, our vision of what home should feel like. Come on, Tasha said gently. Let me make you some tea, and we'll go through the estate paperwork. I know you're exhausted, but the sooner we start the transition process, the sooner you can actually breathe. Inside, the house felt different, lighter, somehow, as if Marcus's letter had lifted something that had been pressing down on everything since the funeral. We settled at the kitchen table, the one we'd found at an estate sale in Grant Park, the one Marcus had refinished while I picked out new chairs and Tasha spread out documents. Okay, so here's what you need to know, she began, slipping into lawyer mode. The house is now in your name, free and clear. No mortgage, no liens, nothing. Marcus had paid it off last year, did you know that? I shook my head. He mentioned we were ahead on payments, but I didn't know we'd finished. He wanted to surprise you. There's a note in the financial records about planning to tell you on your anniversary. Tasha's voice softened. He was always planning ahead, always thinking about how to make things easier for you. The tears came again, and I let them. I was so tired of holding them back, of being strong, of performing grief in ways that wouldn't make people uncomfortable. The business is more complicated, Tasha continued, pulling out another folder. You now own 50% of Brooks Development. James Chen owns 30%, and the remaining 20% is split among 3 other partners. You're now a majority shareholder, which means you have significant decision-making power. I don't know anything about construction or development, Tasha. I design interiors, I pick paint colors and furniture layouts. But you understand community needs, spatial relationships, how people actually live in spaces, and more importantly, you understand Marcus's vision for the company. She pulled out meeting notes, emails, development plans, all marked with Marcus's handwriting. Look at this, he's been incorporating your feedback into projects for years. This affordable housing complex in English Avenue, the unit layouts came from conversations you two had about what families actually need. This mixed-use development in Old Fourth Ward, the retail space specifications were designed around your input about what small businesses require. I stared at the documents, seeing my influence threaded through Marcus's work in ways I'd never fully recognized. He'd listened to me, really listened, and treated my perspective as valuable enough to shape his professional decisions. You've been his partner in this longer than you realized, Tasha said, and he knew that when he gave you this stake in the company, he wasn't just leaving you money, Maya. He was acknowledging your contribution and ensuring you'd have the power to continue the work he cared about. My phone buzzed, then again, and again. I'd turned it back on after the hearing, and now messages were flooding in, some from people who'd been in the courtroom, others from friends who'd heard what happened, and surprisingly, several from Marcus's extended family members I barely knew. One message stood out. It was from Marcus's cousin Angela, the one who'd cried during the letter reading. Maya, I'm so sorry. We should have defended you. We should have questioned Mom Evelyn's story instead of just accepting it. Marcus talked about you all the time, how brilliant you were, how you pushed him to be better, how he felt like he'd finally found someone who saw him for who he really was. We knew how much he loved you, but we let fear of Aunt Evelyn's judgment override what we knew to be true. I hope you can forgive us. More importantly, I hope you know that your family, you always were. We just forgot. I showed the message to Tasha, who smiled grimly. People are starting to realize they were on the wrong side of history. You'll get a lot of these, some genuine, some self. You don't owe anyone forgiveness if you're not ready to give it. But I thought about Marcus's letter, about how he'd ended it with love. Despite everything, he'd never stopped loving his mother, even knowing she'd try to hurt me. He'd never stopped hoping she'd change, even while planning for the likelihood that she wouldn't. That was who. Marcus was someone who believed in people's capacity for growth, even when they repeatedly disappointed him. Could I be that generous? Did I want to be? Over the next few hours, Tasha walked me through the practical realities of my new life. Bank accounts to consolidate, business meetings to attend, scholarship fund logistics to establish. It was overwhelming but also grounding, concrete tasks that required my attention, pulling me out of the spiral of grief and what-ifs. The scholarship is the priority, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I want the first recipients selected by this time next year. I want them announced at an event that honors Marcus's memory properly, not with speeches about his business acumen or his family pedigree, but with stories from the students about their dreams and their plans and what they're going to build. Tasha grinned. There she is. There's the Maya who doesn't take no for an answer. I'm not trying to prove anything to Evelyn or anyone else, I clarified, but I am going to make sure this scholarship does what Marcus wanted, creates real opportunity for kids who remind me of who I used to be, who remind both of us that potential isn't a function of privilege. As evening fell, Tasha finally left, making me promise to eat something and call if I needed her. Alone in the house, I walked through each room, really seeing them for the first time since Marcus died. The living room, where we'd spent countless evenings him sketching, building designs while I worked on client proposals, both of us sharing space in comfortable silence. The kitchen, where we'd attempted elaborate recipes that usually ended in laughter and takeout orders. The bedroom, where I'd held him on nights when the pressure of running a business felt crushing, where he'd held me when imposter syndrome convinced me I didn't deserve my success. In Marcus's office, I found more documents, his business journal, filled with plans and dreams and occasional frustrations, and tucked in the back of a drawer, a sealed envelope with my name on it in his handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Maya, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for leaving you to face my mother alone. I'm sorry for dying before we got to grow old together, before we had kids, before we did all the things we talked about on lazy Sunday mornings. But I'm not sorry for loving you. I'm not sorry for choosing you over my mother's approval. I'm not sorry for building a life that felt true, even if it disappointed people who wanted something different from me. You changed my life, Maya. Not by manipulating me, or controlling me, or any of the things my mother will accuse you of. You changed it by showing me that success without authenticity is just performance, that wealth without purpose is just numbers, that family isn't who raised you, it's who sees you, knows you, and loves you anyway. I hope you fight for our life together. I hope you don't let my mother or anyone else convince you that what we had was anything less than extraordinary. But if it gets too hard, if the fight costs too much, I want you to know, you can let it all go. The house, the business, the scholarship, none of it matters as much as your happiness and peace. The only thing I ask is that you keep designing, keep creating beautiful spaces for people, keep believing that everyone deserves dignity and beauty in their daily lives. That was always your gift, not just the aesthetic sense, but the conviction that good design is about honoring human worth. I love you. I loved you from that first 8-hour date when we talked about everything and nothing. I loved you when you pushed me to start my own firm, even though I was terrified. I loved you every morning when I woke up next to you and couldn't believe someone like you chose someone like me. Keep going, Maya. Build the life you deserve, and know that wherever I am, I'm cheering for you. Always yours, Marcus. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried not the angry, frustrated tears of the past weeks, but the deep, cleansing sobs of someone finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of loss. I cried for Marcus, for the future we'd never have. I cried for Evelyn, trapped in her bitterness and unable to see what she'd destroyed. I cried for myself, for the loneliness ahead and the fear of navigating life without my partner. But underneath the grief, I felt something else emerging. Determination. Marcus had seen this coming, had planned for it, had left me everything I needed to continue our work. The least I could do was honor that faith. The scholarship fund would happen, the business would thrive, and I would keep creating spaces where people felt valued and seen and worthy of beauty, not to prove anything to Evelyn or the people who'd judged me, but because Marcus believed I could, and I wasn't about to let him down. The days following the will reading passed in a strange blur of activity and silence. Legally, everything was settled, the judge had ruled, Evelyn's contest was denied, and the estate transfer was in process. But emotionally, socially, the aftermath rippled through Atlanta's black, professional community like a stone thrown into still water. People didn't know how to act around me anymore. The ones who'd supported Evelyn's narrative found themselves suddenly on the wrong side of a story they'd helped spread. Some sent awkward apology texts, others avoided eye contact at the grocery store. A few doubled down, insisting on social media that there was more to the story, even though my own words had made the truth devastatingly clear. The ones who'd stayed neutral or defended me quietly now felt emboldened to speak up. My phone buzzed constantly with messages of support, invitations to lunch, offers to help with the scholarship fund or the business, or just to sit with me if I needed company. And then there were the ones like Evelyn, the people who'd been so certain of their righteousness that the judge's ruling hadn't changed their minds, only forced them underground. I'd expected Evelyn to appeal. Tasha had prepared me for a prolonged legal battle, months of depositions and motions and courtroom appearances. But 2 weeks after the hearing, her attorney filed a notice of withdrawal. She wasn't appealing, she was done. It's not because she accepts the ruling, Tasha cautioned when she called with the news. It's because her attorney knows they have no case, and continuing would just rack up legal fees while further damaging her reputation. This is a strategic retreat, not a peace offering. Has she tried to contact you? Tasha asked carefully. No, nothing. And I didn't know how I felt about that. Part of me was relieved I couldn't handle another confrontation, another performance of mutual grief and hostility. But another part of me wondered if Marcus had hoped his letter would change something, would crack through his mother's certainty and create space for understanding. If he had, he'd been wrong. Some people hold on to their version of reality, no matter what evidence appears to the contrary. Evelyn had decided I was the villain, and Marcus's letter had simply become another thing to resent me for. More proof that I'd corrupted her son's thinking so thoroughly that even in death, he defended me over her. The first Brooks development meeting I attended was 3 weeks after the hearing. I'd been dreading it, imagining awkward silences and resentful partners who didn't want Marcus's widow playing at being a businesswoman. Instead, James Chen greeted me with genuine warmth, introduced me to everyone as if my presence was natural and expected, and immediately pulled me into a discussion about the English Avenue project. "We're having issues with the unit layouts," he explained, spreading blueprints across the conference table. "The architect designed them according to standard specifications, but something feels off." Marcus would always say, "This doesn't feel like how people actually live," but he'd defer to your expertise on fixing it. "We were hoping you could take a look." I studied the plans, seeing the problem immediately. The architect had prioritized maximum units per building over livability, bedrooms too small for real furniture arrangements, kitchens that couldn't accommodate to people cooking together, living rooms that would feel cramped with anything more than a sofa and TV. "These aren't homes," I said. "These are just efficient arrangements of rooms. Nobody's going to feel good living here, which means turnover will be high, which means the project won't achieve its community stability goals." Exactly what Marcus said. James pulled out a notebook. "So what would you do differently?" For the next 2 hours, I redesigned the layouts, fewer units per building, but each one designed around how families actually function. Kitchens with enough counter space for homework and cooking, living areas that could flex for different uses, storage solutions that acknowledged people's real needs, not theoretical minimalism. The partners listened, asked questions, and by the end of the meeting, we'd agreed on a redesign that would reduce profit margins but create spaces people would actually want to stay in long term. "This is why Marcus wanted you involved," one of the partners said as we packed up. "He always said you understood something the rest of us missed, that good business and good design aren't opposing forces, that if we built places people loved, the business would follow." Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt since Marcus died. Useful, like I had something to contribute beyond grief and legal drama, like I was still building something meaningful, even without him beside me. That the scholarship fund took shape slowly. I met with education consultants, reached out to HBCU admissions offices, drafted mission statements and selection criteria. I wanted it to be perfect, a proper memorial to Marcus's vision and values, but perfection was impossible. So I settled for authentic instead. The Marcus Brooks Scholarship wouldn't be for students with perfect grades or impressive extracurriculars. It would be for kids like I'd been, smart and determined but lacking resources, overlooked by traditional metrics, hungry for a chance to prove what they could do with opportunity. I created an advisory board of people who understood that mission: 2 teachers from Title I schools in Atlanta, a guidance counselor from Bankhead, a Spelman alumna who ran a nonprofit for first-generation college students, and Angela, Marcus's cousin, who'd apologized with such raw honesty. "Are you sure you want me involved?" Angela had asked when I invited her. "After everything our family put you through." "Marcus loved you," I'd said simply. "He talked about how you were one of the few relatives who never made him feel like he had to perform. I think he'd want you part of this." She'd cried then, and we'd cried together, to women trying to honor a man we'd both loved, whose death had revealed uncomfortable truths about loyalty and courage and the cost of staying silent when someone you care about is being mistreated. One evening, about a month after the hearing, I answered a knock on my door to find Patricia, Evelyn's sister. She stood on my porch looking uncomfortable and determined, holding a casserole dish like a shield. "I made chicken and dumplings," she said without preamble. "Evelyn's recipe. I thought you might like some." I stared at her, confused. Patricia had been Evelyn's enforcer, her loyal soldier in the campaign against me. Why was she here now? "Can I come in?" Patricia asked. "Just for a minute." Against my better judgment, I let her. We sat in the living room, the casserole cooling on the coffee table between us, and Patricia looked around at the space Marcus and I had created together. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "The house. I can see both of you in it, his practicality, your artistry. It feels like a home, not just a showplace." "Thank you," I said carefully, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I owe you an apology." Patricia's voice was steady but strained. "I should have stopped Evelyn at the funeral, at the courthouse hell, years ago when she first started badmouthing you to the family. I should have stood up and said that what she was doing was wrong, but I didn't, because it was easier to support my sister than to challenge her." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I listened to Marcus's letter," Patricia said, "really listened, and I realized that my nephew spent his last months alive planning how to protect you from his own family. That's not normal, Maya. That's not okay, and I was part of making him feel like that was necessary." She twisted her hands in her lap. "Evelyn isn't doing well. She's barely leaving the house, barely talking to anyone. She's stuck in this loop of anger and grief and regret, and I don't know how to help her. But I realized I needed to make my own amends, separate from whatever she chooses to do. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to accept the apology graciously, to be the bigger person, but another part, the part that had been publicly humiliated and accused, and forced to defend my love in a courtroom, wasn't ready to absolve anyone yet. I appreciate you coming, I said finally, and I appreciate the apology, but I need time. Patricia, I need to figure out who I am now, as a widow, as a business owner, as the person Marcus believed in enough to leave his legacy to. I can't also carry the weight of making his family feel better about how they treated me. Patricia nodded, standing. That's fair, more than fair, but when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to be part of your life, not as Evelyn's sister, but as Marcus's aunt, who should have done better by him while he was alive. After she left, I sat with the casserole and the complicated feelings her visit had stirred up. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip, a decision I could make once and be done with. It was something I'd have to choose over and over, or maybe never choose at all. And both options felt valid. That night, I dreamed of Marcus, not the traumatic dreams I'd been having since he died, the accident, the funeral, the hospital, but a memory. We were in Home Depot on a Saturday morning, arguing playfully about whether we needed the expensive level or if the cheap one would work fine for hanging pictures. Maya, we're going to hang approximately 1 million things in this house over the years, Dream Marcus said, grinning. We should invest in a good level. We're going to hang approximately 10 things, and then we're going to hire someone because neither of us actually knows what we're doing. Dream, Maya countered. We'd bought the expensive level, and we'd hung exactly 3 pictures before calling a handyman. I woke up smiling, tears on my face, feeling the particular ache of remembering someone you loved being exactly themselves. The grief hadn't lessened, but it had changed, shapeless, like drowning, more like carrying a weight I was learning to balance. The silence in my life wasn't empty anymore. It was full of Marcus's presence, in different ways: his letter, his plans, his vision for what our life together had meant and what my life after could become. And it was full of my own voice, getting stronger, learning to speak without seeking his approval or fearing judgment from people who'd never understood us anyway. I still had hard days ahead, holidays without him, anniversaries, random moments when something would happen and I'd reach for my phone to text him before remembering. But I also had his scholarship fund to build, his business to help grow, and a house full of memories that hurt but also healed. In the silence left behind by the courtroom drama and public speculation, I was beginning to hear something new, my own voice, deciding what came next. The day I officially took ownership of everything, the house deed transferred, the business shares registered in my name, the scholarship fund established as a legal entity, decided to do something I'd been putting off since the funeral. I needed to go through Marcus's things properly, not just living around them like museum exhibits, but actually sorting, keeping, remembering, and letting go where necessary. I started with his closet. Each item of clothing held a memory: the suit he'd worn to our wedding, still faintly smelling of the cologne he wore that day; the Morehouse hoodie he'd had since college, worn soft and comfortable; the collection of sneakers that he'd loved and I'd teased him about. How many pairs of nearly identical black Nikes does one man need? Each one is different, he'd protest. This one's for running. This one's for casual wear. This one's for when I want to look put together but not too formal. I packed some items to donate, set aside others for Marcus's cousins who might want them, and kept a few pieces for myself: the t-shirts I'd stolen for sleeping in, the soft flannel he'd worn on cold mornings while making coffee. In his nightstand, I found more letters, not to me this time, but ones he'd never sent. Draft after draft of something he'd been trying to say to his mother: Mom, I need you to understand that loving Maya doesn't mean I stopped loving you. It just means I also chose to love someone you didn't approve of. Why can't both things be true? Crossed out, rewritten. Mom, what if I told you that the happiest I've ever been was in these last 4 years? Would you believe me? Or would you convince yourself that I was deluded, manipulated, not thinking clearly? When did you stop trusting my judgment? Another attempt. Mom, I'm building a life that feels authentic to who I am, not who you needed me to be. I wish that was enough for you. I wish you could see that my success isn't diminished by being measured differently than you planned. I wish you could meet me where I am, instead of mourning the version of me you wanted. None of them were finished. None of them had been sent. Marcus had struggled with how to bridge the gap between his mother's expectations and his own truth, and he'd died without finding the words that might have made her understand. That broke my heart more than anything, knowing he'd tried so hard to make peace between loving me and loving her, knowing it had weighed on him, knowing he'd never found resolution. I took the letters to the backyard, to the fire pit we'd installed last spring for cozy evenings. I sat in the growing dusk and read each one again, hearing Marcus's voice in every frustrated attempt at connection. Then I burned them, one by one, watching his words turn to ash and smoke. "I'm sorry she couldn't hear you," I whispered to the flames. "I'm sorry loving me cost you peace with your mother. I'm sorry you had to choose." But even as I said it, I remembered his letter, the one the judge had read in court. "You didn't take me from her. She pushed me away." Marcus hadn't seen it as my fault. He'd seen it, clearly, his mother's rigidity, her inability to accept a path different from the one she'd planned, her choice to reject rather than bend. I couldn't carry guilt for that. It would dishonor everything Marcus had tried to tell me. 2 months after the hearing, the scholarship fund was ready to launch. We'd established the criteria, set up an application system, partnered with 5 HBCUs, and planned an announcement event for early spring. I wanted it to be special, not just a press release, but a celebration that captured what Marcus had believed education could do. The invitations went out to community leaders, educators, potential donors, and yes, to Marcus's family, including Evelyn. "Are you sure about this?" Tasha asked when she saw the guest list. "You don't owe her an invitation." "No, but Marcus would have wanted her there. This was his dream, using his success to create opportunities for kids like we used to be. She should see what he was building, even if she couldn't support it while he was alive." The RSVP from Evelyn never came, but 3 days before the event, Patricia called. "She wants to come," Patricia said carefully, "but she doesn't know if you want her there, and she's too proud to ask directly. So I'm asking for her. Would it be okay if Evelyn attended the scholarship launch?" I thought about it, really thought about it. This event was about Marcus's legacy, about opportunity and possibility and hope. Did I want it tainted by the woman who'd tried to destroy me? Did I want photographers capturing our first interaction since the courtroom, turning what should be a celebration into another chapter of family drama? But I also thought about what Marcus would say if he were here. He'd want his mother there. He'd want her to see what they'd built, what their money was doing, what kind of impact was possible when wealth served purpose beyond accumulation. "She can come," I said. "But Patricia, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to perform reconciliation for the cameras. I'm not going to hug her or pretend everything's fine or give people the redemption arc they want. She can be there. She can see what Marcus created. But I'm not ready for more than that." "I understand. And Maya, thank you. This is more grace than she deserves." The night before the launch, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, touching things Marcus had touched, remembering conversations we'd had about this moment. He'd dreamed so big, not just one scholarship, but eventually dozens, maybe even a full foundation that could transform educational access for underprivileged students across the South. "We'll start small," he'd said, sketching plans on a napkin during dinner one night. 5 scholarships the first year. Then we'll grow it as the business grows. And maybe other people will see what we're doing and start their own funds. Maybe we'll inspire a whole movement." Always thinking bigger, I'd teased him. But I'd loved that about Marcus's refusal to think small, his belief that individual success should create ripples of opportunity for others. Now, I was the one carrying that vision forward. The weight of it felt immense, but also right. This was how I honored him, not by preserving his memory in amber, but by continuing to build what he'd started. The launch event was held at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in downtown Atlanta. Choice that felt symbolic. This building represented the long history of fighting for equity and access, the generations of activists who demanded that opportunity not be limited by race or class. The Marcus Brooks Scholarship was part of that continuum. I arrived early, watching the event team set up banners with Marcus's photo and the scholarship logo, tables with information about the application process, a video presentation we'd created featuring testimonials from first-generation college students about what their education had made possible. People began arriving, educators and business leaders, friends and colleagues, Marcus's partners from the firm. Angela came with her husband, giving me a tight hug and whispering, he'd be so proud. James Chen brought several employees from Brooks Development, all wearing pins with Marcus's photo. And then, just as the program was about to start, Evelyn walked in. She looked smaller than I remembered, older. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry except her wedding ring, her hair styled but not elaborately. She looked like what she was, a mother attending an event honoring her dead son, carrying grief that had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, everything else faded. I saw recognition there, and pain, and something that might have been regret. But she didn't approach me, and I didn't approach her. We simply acknowledged each other's presence and moved on. The program began with a video montage of Marcus' photos from childhood through adulthood, clips of him at construction sites and community meetings, images of the buildings he'd developed and the people he'd worked with. His voice played over some of the footage, talking about his vision for affordable housing and community development. I watched Evelyn watching her son on the screen, and I saw her face crumble. Patricia, sitting beside her, took her hand, but Evelyn seemed barely aware of anything except Marcus's image, his voice. The day I officially took ownership of everything, the house deed transferred, the business shares registered in my name, the scholarship fund established as a legal entity, decided to do something I'd been putting off since the funeral. I needed to go through Marcus's things properly, not just living around them like museum exhibits, but actually sorting, keeping, remembering, and letting go where necessary. I started with his closet. Each item of clothing held a memory: the suit he'd worn to our wedding, still faintly smelling of the cologne he wore that day; the Morehouse hoodie he'd had since college, worn soft and comfortable; the collection of sneakers that he'd loved and I'd teased him about. How many pairs of nearly identical black Nikes does one man need? Each one is different, he'd protest. This one's for running, this one's for casual wear, this one's for when I want to look put together but not too formal. I packed some items to donate, set aside others for Marcus's cousins who might want them, and kept a few pieces for myself: the t-shirts I'd stolen for sleeping in, the soft flannel he'd worn on cold mornings while making coffee. Marcus spent his life trying to bridge worlds, the world he came from and the world he was building, his family's expectations and his own values, traditional measures of success and more meaningful ones. He didn't always succeed. Sometimes, the bridges he tried to build couldn't bear the weight of other people's rigidity, but he never stopped trying, and he never stopped believing that understanding was possible if people were willing to really see each other. I looked directly at Evelyn then, just for a moment. This scholarship is part of that bridge building. It's Marcus saying that your circumstances at birth don't define your potential. It's Marcus saying that investment in people, not buildings or portfolios, but actual human beings with dreams and determination, that's the legacy worth leaving. And it's Marcus saying that love can take different forms, but it's always most powerful when it's generous, when it creates rather than restricts, when it opens doors rather than slamming them shut. The room was silent. I saw people wiping tears, nodding, recognizing the multiple layers of meaning in my words. So thank you for being here to launch the Marcus Brooks Scholarship. Thank you for believing, as he did, that we're all responsible for creating the ladders we climb and then reaching back to help others up. And thank you for helping me honor the man I loved by continuing the work he started. The applause was thunderous. People stood a standing ovation that went on long enough to feel overwhelming. I looked out at the crowd and saw the community Marcus had built and believed in, the people who'd seen his vision and wanted to be part of making it real. And I saw Evelyn, still seated, crying openly now, her face a landscape of emotions too complex to name. After the formal program, people mingled, networking and discussing the scholarship details. I was surrounded immediately: educators wanting to partner, donors offering support, former clients telling me how proud Marcus would be. Through the crowd, I saw Evelyn stand and move toward the exit. She stopped in front of the photo display we'd created: images of Marcus's projects, candid shots from construction sites, pictures of families moving into his affordable housing units. She stood there for a long time, studying each image like she was trying to memorize something she'd missed while he was alive. I excused myself from the conversation I was in and walked over to her, not because I'd forgiven everything, not because I was ready for reconciliation, but because this moment mattered, because Marcus would have wanted it, and because sometimes dignity means acknowledging shared grief, even with people who've hurt you. "Mrs. Brooks," I said quietly. She turned, and up close, I could see how much the past months had cost her. The lines around her eyes, the tremor in her hands, the weight of regret she was carrying. Maya. My name sounded different in her mouth, now less like an accusation, more like a concession. "The scholarship. It's exactly what Marcus would have wanted." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." I didn't understand. Her voice broke. I didn't understand what he was trying to build, what you were both building. I was so focused on what I thought success should look like that I couldn't see what it actually looked like for him. I waited, not making this easy for her, but not walking away either. I can't undo what I said about you, Evelyn continued, each word clearly costing her. I can't undo how I treated you, the things I accused you of, the way I tried to destroy your reputation, because I couldn't accept that my son had chosen his own path. But I want you to know that I heard his letter, really heard it, and I'm trying to understand, Mrs. Brooks, I said carefully. I appreciate that, but understanding doesn't erase harm. And I'm not in a place where I can absolve you or tell you everything's okay now. Maybe someday, maybe never. I honestly don't know. She nodded, accepting that. That's fair. More than fair. She looked back at Marcus's photos. He loved you so much. I can see it now, in these pictures, in the things people have said tonight. He loved you in a way that made him braver, better, more himself. And I was too blind to see it as anything but a threat. We stood there in silence for a moment. Two women who'd both loved Marcus Brooks, who'd both lost him, who were both trying to figure out how to live in a world without him while honoring what he'd meant. The scholarship will make a difference, Evelyn said finally. He'll be remembered for this, not for construction projects or business success, but for changing lives. That's a real legacy. Yes, I agreed. It is. She left shortly after, and I watched her go with complicated feelings. Not forgiveness, exactly, but maybe the beginning of something like peace, or at least the understanding that we could both honor Marcus's memory without being in each other's lives, that we could both carry our grief separately while acknowledging its source was the same. As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, Tasha found me standing in front of the scholarship banner. You did good, she said, putting her arm around me. Marcus would be proud. I hope so, I said. I really hope so.
Maya sees people, really sees them, in a way most of us don't. She sees potential and dignity and worth in everyone she meets. She designs spaces that honor that seeing, that tell people they deserve beauty and care and attention to detail. And she made me want to design buildings the same way, not as commodities, but as gifts to the communities they serve. So here's to my wife, Maya Brooks, who changed my life by refusing to let me settle for anything less than the truth. I promise to spend the rest of my days trying to see the world the way you see it, with possibility and compassion, and the absolute certainty that we're all responsible for building the future we want to live in. I sat on the couch, crying and laughing simultaneously, hearing his love and his vision and his understanding of what we'd meant to each other. He'd kept that promise. In the 3.5 years we'd had after the wedding, he'd designed buildings that served communities. He'd mentored young entrepreneurs. He'd given back constantly, never forgetting where he'd come from or who'd been left behind. He'd loved me with the kind of steadiness that made me braver, better, more myself. And now it was my turn to keep the promise, to continue seeing people the way he'd learned to see them, to build the future we'd wanted together, even if I had to build it alone. The second year of the scholarship, we doubled the number of recipients. 10 students instead of 5. The fundraising had been successful. Major donors who believed in the mission, small donations from community members who'd been touched by Marcus's work, matching grants from foundations that saw our model as worth replicating. I'd also started speaking publicly about Marcus's legacy, about the intersection of business and community development, about how wealth creation and social responsibility weren't opposing forces. I'd been invited to speak at business schools, community organizations, even at the HBCUs our scholars attended. It felt strange at first, standing in front of audiences talking about my dead husband and our shared vision, but it also felt necessary, because Marcus's story, our story, was about more than grief and conflict. It was about the possibility of building success that served something beyond ego and accumulation. It was about love as a transformative force, not just in personal relationships, but in how we approached business. Community legacy. 2 years after Marcus's death, on what would have been our 6th wedding anniversary, I did something I'd been considering for months. I bought the lot next to the house Marcus and I had shared, a small, vacant piece of property that had been on the market forever. I was going to build something there. Not for profit, not for status, but because Marcus and I had always talked about creating a community space in our neighborhood. a place where local artists could exhibit, where kids could take free art classes, where neighbors could gather for events and celebrations. A space that embodied everything we'd believed about beauty and access and community. I was calling it the Marcus Brooks Community Arts Center, and I was designing it myself, the first major architectural project I'd ever taken on. It terrified me. It exhilarated me. It felt like the most meaningful work I'd ever done. When I told the Brooks development team about the project, they insisted on helping. Pro bono, James said firmly. This is our tribute too. Let us build this with you. So we were building it together. Architects and engineers and contractors and community members, all volunteering time and expertise to create something that would outlast all of us. The groundbreaking was scheduled for Marcus's birthday, and I'd invited everyone who'd been part of our journey. The scholars and their families, colleagues from both our businesses, friends who'd supported us, even Evelyn, who'd quietly asked Patricia if she could attend. The morning of the groundbreaking, I stood at the kitchen window looking out at the vacant lot, imagining what would soon rise there, and I felt Marcus's presence, not literally, not superstitiously, but in the way your person becomes part of how you see the world, even after they're gone. He'd believed in this kind of building, this kind of legacy, this kind of love that expanded beyond the two people sharing it and created space for entire communities to flourish. Love builds wealth deeper than money, he'd written in his final letter to his mother. At the time, it had seemed like a gentle rebuke, a correction of her values. But now I understood it differently. It wasn't just about money versus emotions. It was about understanding that the wealth that matters, the kind that transforms lives and creates lasting change, is built through love. Love of community, love of possibility, love of people's inherent dignity and potential. That was Marcus's real legacy, not the buildings or the business or even the scholarship, though all of those mattered. His real legacy was showing people a different way to measure success, a different way to build wealth, a different way to love that expanded rather than restricted. And I was committed to continuing that work, not because I was trying to keep Marcus alive through constant activity, but because he'd shown me a better way to live, and I owed it to both of us to keep building on that foundation. As I got ready for the groundbreaking ceremony, I put on the pearl earrings, the ones that had been his grandmother's, that Evelyn had never wanted him to give me, that represented family and belonging and the complicated ways we inherit more than just objects from the people who came before us. I looked at myself in the mirror. 34 years old, a widow, a business owner, a scholarship founder, a woman learning to carry grief and hope simultaneously. I looked different than I had 2 years ago. Older, yes, but also stronger. More certain, more myself. I'm doing it, I said to the mirror, to Marcus's memory, to myself. I'm building the life you believed I could. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for leaving me everything I needed to continue our work. The groundbreaking was beautiful. Over 100 people showed up, spanning every part of mine and Marcus's lives. The scholars came with their families, reading testimonials about what the scholarship had made possible. James and the Brooks development team brought ceremonial hard hats for everyone. Community members shared memories of Marcus and expressed excitement about the Arts Center. And Evelyn came. She stood toward the back with Patricia, not seeking attention, not making speeches, just bearing witness. When our eyes met, she nodded slightly. Acknowledgement, respect, maybe even gratitude. We'd never be close, but we'd both moved forward in our own ways, both trying to honor Marcus by learning from our mistakes. I spoke briefly, fighting tears but keeping my voice steady. 2 years ago, I lost my husband, my partner, my best friend. Marcus Brooks was taken too soon, too suddenly, before we'd finished building all the things we'd dreamed about together. For a while, I thought that meant our dreams died with him. But I was wrong. Dreams don't die when dreamers do. They just need new hands to carry them forward. And I'm so grateful to everyone here who's picked up pieces of Marcus's vision and helped me carry it. The scholars, the business partners, the community members, the friends and family who refused to let grief be the end of the story. This arts center represents everything Marcus believed, that beauty matters, that access matters, that community matters, that how we build is as important as what we build. It will be a space where everyone is welcome, where creativity is honored, where young people can explore their talents without worrying about whether they can afford lessons or supplies. It's not just a memorial to Marcus. It's a continuation of his work, his values, his belief that we're all responsible for building the world we want to live in. So thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in this vision. And Marcus, I looked up at the clear blue sky. Thank you for showing me what love really means. Thank you for teaching me that the best way to honor someone's memory is to keep building, keep growing, keep creating spaces where people feel seen and valued and possible. Love builds wealth deeper than money. I understand that now, and I promise to keep building. We broke ground together, everyone taking turns with shovels, cameras capturing the moment, children running around with excitement about the playground that would be part of the center. It was chaotic and joyful and exactly what Marcus would have wanted. Not some somber, reverent ceremony, but a celebration of community and possibility. As the sun set over Atlanta, casting golden light across the construction site, I felt something I hadn't felt since the morning Marcus died. Complete peace. Not the absence of grief, that would always be with me, but peace with the path forward. Peace with the reality that I could honor Marcus's memory while also building my own future. Peace with the understanding that love doesn't end with death. It transforms, evolves, continues in the lives we touch and the work we leave behind. Tasha found me standing alone near the edge of the property, watching the last guests leave. "You good?" she asked, knowing that question carried weight after everything we'd been through. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. "I'm good. I'm sad and hopeful and exhausted and excited all at once. But I'm good. He'd be proud, you know. Of all of this. Of you. I hope so. But more than that, I hope I'm proud. I hope I'm building something that feels true to who I am, not just who he was. Does that make sense?"
Perfect sense. Tasha squeezed my shoulder. That's what growing through grief looks like. Honoring the past while not being trapped by it. Carrying someone's legacy while still writing your own story. That night, back in the house that no longer felt haunted by absence but rather filled with presence, I sat down to write. Not to Marcus this time, but to the first Marcus Brooks scholar who would graduate next year, Destiny, the architecture student who reminded me so much of my younger self. Dear Destiny, when you walk across that stage at Howard next spring, you'll be the first Marcus Brooks scholar to graduate. That's an honor, but it's also a responsibility not to be perfect, not to represent some idealized version of success, but to remember that your education isn't just for you. Marcus believed that when one person succeeds, they have an obligation to create pathways for others. Not because you owe anyone anything, but because community is how we survive, how we thrive, how we build futures that are bigger than individual achievement. You're going to face moments when you feel like an imposter, when you wonder if you belong in spaces that weren't built with you in mind. I know because I've been there, but here's what I learned. Belonging isn't about fitting into existing spaces. It's about claiming your right to exist in them fully, authentically, without shrinking or performing or apologizing for taking up room. Design buildings that serve people, not just clients. Create spaces that honor dignity, that acknowledge that everyone deserves beauty and functionality and thoughtful attention to detail. And when you're successful, not if, remember the scholarship that made your education possible and find ways to do the same for someone else. Marcus used to say that love builds wealth deeper than money. I didn't fully understand what he meant until after he died and I had to figure out how to continue the work we'd started together. Now I understand. The wealth that matters isn't what you accumulate, it's what you create, what you give, what you leave behind that continues growing long after you're gone. So congratulations on your graduation in advance. Thank you for being brave enough to dream big despite your circumstances. Thank you for reminding me why this work matters. And thank you for carrying Marcus's legacy forward by becoming exactly who you're meant to be, with love and pride. Maya Thompson-Brooks sealed the letter, knowing I'd give it to her at graduation, and felt the familiar ache of wishing Marcus could be there to see it. But he would see it, in a way, through every scholar who succeeded, every building that served its community, every person who learned from our story that love and success and legacy were about more than money and status and meeting other people's expectations. 3 years after Marcus died, the Marcus Brooks Community Arts Center opened its doors. The building was everything I'd dreamed: bright, welcoming, full of natural light and flexible spaces. There was a gallery for local artists, studios for classes, a small theater for performances, and a courtyard where people could gather. Every design choice reflected the values Marcus and I had shared: accessibility, beauty, functionality, dignity. The opening day was overwhelming. Hundreds of people came through, families from the neighborhood, artists excited about exhibition space, kids eager to sign up for classes, community leaders impressed by what we'd built. Local media covered it, positioning the center as a model for how private development could serve public good. But my favorite moment came late in the day, when I saw a little girl, maybe 7 years old, walk into the main gallery and stop dead, her mouth forming a perfect O of wonder. The walls were covered with paintings and photographs by local artists, mostly black artists whose work rarely got mainstream attention. "Mama," the girl whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "they made all this. People who look like us." "Yes, baby," her mother said, tears in her eyes. "People who look like us make beautiful things. And now you know there's a place where you can make beautiful things too." That was why it mattered. Not the press coverage or the architectural awards or the professional recognition. It mattered because a 7-year-old girl now knew that creativity and beauty and art were for her, that spaces existed where she was welcomed and celebrated and given tools to explore her potential. That evening, after everyone had left, and I was doing a final walkthrough before locking up, I stood in the center of the main gallery and felt Marcus's presence so strongly it almost knocked me over. Not literally, I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural interventions, but in the sense that this space embodied everything he'd believed, everything we'd believed together. "We did it," I whispered to the empty room, to his memory, to the future we'd created. "We built something that matters, something that will outlast both of us, something that keeps growing and evolving and creating opportunities we can't even imagine yet." My phone buzzed with a text from Angela, "Just left the center. It's perfect. Marcus would be so proud. We're so proud." And another from James, "The team wants to know if you're interested in consulting on our next community development project. Your design philosophy is exactly what we need." And one from Destiny, "Ms. Maya, I just toured the center with my architecture professor. She asked who designed it. When I told her about you and Mr. Marcus's story, she cried. She said this is what architecture should be: love made visible. I want to build like this someday. Love made visible." Yes, that's exactly what it was. I'd started this journey as a woman from Bankhead Courts who'd clawed her way to a scholarship and a small business, and the belief that I deserved dignity despite my circumstances. Then I'd become a wife, a partner, someone learning what it meant to build a life with another person who saw and valued and loved me exactly as I was. Then I'd become a widow, thrust into a public battle over my worth and my truth, forced to defend my love in a courtroom while grieving the loss of my person. And now I was, what? A scholarship founder, a business owner, a designer who'd created a community space that would serve people for generations, a woman who'd transformed grief into purpose without letting purpose erase grief, someone who'd learned that honoring the dead meant continuing to live fully, authentically, courageously. I was Maya Thompson-Brooks, and I was still building. For years after Marcus died, I met someone. His name was David, a community organizer who'd volunteered at the art center and gradually become a friend. We'd spent months talking about community development and social justice and the intersection of art and activism. Before, he'd nervously asked if maybe I'd want to grab dinner sometime, not as friends, but as something more. I'd said yes, terrified and excited and guilty all at once. Loving someone new didn't mean I'd stopped loving Marcus. It just meant I was learning that the heart could hold multiple truths simultaneously: grief and joy, memory and possibility, honoring the past while still reaching for a future. David understood that. He never tried to replace Marcus or compete with his memory. He just offered his own kind of love, steady, patient, present. He came to the scholarship events and the Brooks development meetings and the Arts Center fundraisers. He listened to my stories about Marcus without jealousy or discomfort. And slowly, carefully, we built something new while I continued maintaining what Marcus and I had created together. "Is this okay?" I asked Tasha one day, needing to hear from someone who'd witnessed my entire journey. "Am I betraying him by moving forward?" "Maya, Marcus literally wrote you a letter telling you to keep living, to keep building, to find happiness. You're not betraying him, you're honoring him by refusing to treat grief like a prison sentence." She paused. "Besides, Love isn't a finite resource. You can love Marcus forever and also love David now. Both things can be true. On what would have been Marcus's 40th birthday, I stood at his grave with flowers and David, waiting respectfully by the car. I brought the latest scholarship update, 15 recipients this year, planning to expand to 25 next year. I'd brought photos of the Arts Center's most recent exhibition. I'd brought stories of the lives being changed by the work we'd started. I miss you, I told the headstone, the words as true as they'd been 4 years ago. I'll always miss you, but I'm okay, Marcus. I'm building the life you believed I could. I'm creating opportunities and spaces and beauty. I'm loving again, which terrifies me. But I think you'd like him. I think you'd appreciate that he respects our story instead of trying to erase it. The scholarship bears your name, but it's becoming bigger than either of us. Students are graduating, getting jobs, starting their own businesses, giving back. The ripples keep spreading. Your mother came to the last fundraiser. She didn't stay long, but she came. She donated again, anonymously this time. I think she's finally starting to understand what you were trying to tell her. It's too late for you to reconcile. But maybe it's not too late for her to honor your memory by living differently going forward. I'm writing a book about community-centered design. Publishers are interested because of our story, because of what the Arts Center represents. Part of me worries about exploiting your death for my career, but mostly I think you'd want these ideas out in the world. You'd want other people building spaces that honor dignity and serve communities. So thank you. Thank you for loving me, for believing in me, for leaving me everything I needed to continue our work. Thank you for the letter that saved me in that courtroom. Thank you for planning ahead, for protecting me, for understanding your mother well enough to know exactly what would happen. Most of all, thank you for showing me that success isn't about money or status or other people's approval. It's about building something that matters, loving people authentically, and creating opportunities for others to thrive. I'm still building, Marcus, and I'll keep building until I can't anymore, because that's what you taught me. That's what love does, it builds. I placed the flowers on his grave, touched the cold marble one last time, and walked back to David, to my life, to the future that still held possibility, despite the past's profound losses. That night, I dreamed of Marcus one more time. We were sitting on the porch of our house, his house, my house, our house watching the sunset over Atlanta. He looked exactly as he had the day we met, young, hopeful, certain that the future held something beautiful if we were brave enough to reach for it. You're doing good, Maya, Dream, Marcus said, smiling that smile that had first made me fall in love with him. I knew you would. I miss you every single day. I know, but you're living anyway. That's all I ever wanted for you, to keep living, keep building, keep being exactly who you are. Love builds wealth deeper than money. Remember, I'm teaching other people that now, through the scholarship, through the center, through everything we built together. It's not just what we built together anymore, it's what you're building now, and that's perfect. That's exactly right. He reached over and took my hand, his touch warm and real in the dream logic way that made sense while sleeping. I love you, I'll always love you, but you don't need my permission to move forward. You never did. I needed to hear it though. Then hear it. Build your life, Maya. Build it big and beautiful and full of the same love you gave me. Build it for yourself, not as a memorial to me. Build it because you're Maya Thompson-Brooks, and you were always going to change the world, with or without me. I just got lucky enough to be part of your story for a while. I woke up crying, but they were good tears, healing tears, the tears of someone finally understanding that grief and growth weren't opposing forces. They were partners in the complicated dance of continuing to live after loss. 5 years after Marcus died, the scholarship fund had supported 43 students. The Arts Center had served over 15,000 community members. Brooks Development had completed 12 affordable housing projects. And I had written my book, Love Builds Wealth, Community-Centered Design as Social Justice, which was being used in architecture and urban planning programs across the country. But more important than any of those metrics was the culture we'd create, a way of thinking about success that prioritized people over profit, community over individual achievement, dignity over status. Young entrepreneurs reached out constantly, asking how to build businesses that served social good. Designers wanted to learn our approach. Communities requested consultation on development projects. Marcus's legacy wasn't a building or a bank account. It was a shift in how people thought about what they were building and why it mattered. and my legacy still being written, still evolving, was proving that you could transform grief into purpose without being consumed by either, that you could honor the past while building the future, that love, in all its forms, was the foundation upon which everything meaningful was built. On the 5th anniversary of Marcus's death, I organized something different than the usual memorial events. Instead of gathering at his grave or hosting a somber remembrance, we held a celebration at the Arts Centura Festival, showcasing scholarship recipients' achievements, community artists' work, and the various projects that had grown from Marcus's vision. There was music and food and laughter, children running around the courtyard, Destiny, now graduated and working at an architecture firm, presenting her first major project design, scholarship recipients from all 5 years, sharing updates on their lives and their own efforts to give back. It was loud and messy and joyful, the opposite of mourning, the embodiment of life continuing. Late in the afternoon, I stood on the center's small stage to address the crowd. David was in the front row, supportive but not seeking attention. Tasha stood beside him, my constant friend through every phase of this journey. And in the back, almost hidden behind a pillar, I spotted Evelyn with Patricia. She came to these events now. Every year, always standing in the back, never seeking recognition. We'd spoken briefly a few times, cordial, respectful, but never intimate. The hurt was too deep, the past too painful. But she showed up, she donated, and in her own way, she was trying to honor the son she'd never fully understood while he was alive. 5 years ago, I began, my voice carrying across the crowded space. I lost my husband. Marcus Brooks was 35 years old, brilliant, kind, and just beginning to realize his full potential. His death was senseless and devastating, and it broke something in me that I wasn't sure would ever heal. But Marcus, in his wisdom, had planned for the possibility that he might not be here to see our dreams realized. He left me a letter, a will, and most importantly, a roadmap for how to continue building even after he was gone. This center, this scholarship, the community development work that continues through his business, these aren't memorials. They're living extensions of values that Marcus and I shared, that everyone deserves dignity, that beauty and access aren't luxury goods but fundamental rights, that success means nothing if it doesn't create opportunities for others. 5 years ago, Marcus's mother stood in a courtroom and called me a gold digger. I saw Evelyn flinch, but I continued gently, not with cruelty, but with truth. She believed I'd manipulated her son, that I'd stolen him from his rightful place in her vision of success. And in some ways, she was right. I did change Marcus's path, not through manipulation, but through love, through showing him that success could be measured differently, that wealth could be built through community service rather than just accumulation. Marcus chose that path, not because I forced him, but because it aligned with who he really was underneath all the expectations and pressure to perform success in traditional ways. And now, 5 years later, we can see the results of that choice. 43 students who might not have attended college are building careers and giving back to their communities. 15,000 people have access to art and creativity and beauty through this center. 12 affordable housing developments have provided quality homes for families who'd been priced out of their own city. That's the wealth Marcus built. That's the legacy that matters. So today, on the 5th anniversary of his death, I want to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who believed in this vision when it would have been easier to dismiss it. Thank you to the scholarship recipients who prove every day that potential isn't determined by circumstances. Thank you to the Brooks development team who continues building with purpose and integrity. Thank you to the Arts Center volunteers and supporters who make this space possible. And, Marcus, wherever you are, thank you for seeing me, loving me, and trusting me to continue our work. I hope I'm making you proud. More than that, I hope I'm making myself proud by building a life that honors your memory without being limited by it. Love builds wealth deeper than money. I understand now, it's not just a beautiful phrase, it's a practice, a commitment, a way of moving through the world that transforms everything it touches. So let's keep building. Let's keep creating wealth that matters, wealth measured in opportunities and communities and the lives we touch rather than the money we accumulate. Let's keep proving that success and service aren't opposing values, but natural partners in the work of creating the world we want to live in. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this story. And thank you for helping me turn grief into something beautiful. The applause was thunderous, but more than that, I felt the energy in the room, hope and possibility and collective commitment to continuing the work. This wasn't about me or Marcus anymore. It was about a movement, a mindset, a way of building that centered community and dignity and love. As the evening wound down and people began leaving, Evelyn approached me for the first time in 5 years. We stood facing each other, two women shaped by the same man in vastly different ways, carrying our own versions of grief and regret and hard-won understanding. Maya, she said, my name sounding different in her mouth than it ever had before, so sadder, sincere. I just wanted to say, thank you, for honoring him this way, for building all of this, for not letting my bitterness destroy what he wanted to create. Mrs. Brooks, Evelyn, she interrupted gently. After 5 years, I think you can call me Evelyn. Evelyn, I tried out the name, feeling its weight. I didn't do this to prove anything to you. I did it because Marcus believed in it, and I believed in him, and this is how I honor that. I know, that's why it matters. That's why I'm grateful. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I'll never stop regretting how I treated you, the things I said, the pain I caused when you were already grieving. I can't undo that, but I hope you can see that I'm trying to learn from it, to be different going forward. I see that, I said, and I meant it. I see you showing up, supporting the scholarship, being present even when it's uncomfortable. That counts for something. Marcus loved you so much, Evelyn continued, tears gathering in her eyes. I couldn't see it then. I was too blinded by my own expectations, my own fears of losing him. But I see it now, in everything you've built, in how you've honored his memory by actually living his values instead of just preserving them. You loved him the way every parent hopes someone will love their child, by seeing who they really are and encouraging them to become more of that. We stood there in silence for a moment, and then, impulsively, surprisingly, I reached out and hugged her. It was brief and awkward, but it was real, and when we pulled apart, I saw something in her face that looked like peace. He'd be glad we're here, I said. Not reconciled exactly, but not enemies either. Just two people who loved him differently, learning to coexist in the world he left behind. Yes, Evelyn agreed. He would be glad about that. She left shortly after, and I watched her go with a feeling of closure I hadn't known I needed. Not forgiveness, exactly, and certainly not forgetting, but something like acceptance of the past's complexity, of people's capacity to grow even late in life, of the possibility that healing could happen in unexpected ways. That night, David and I sat on the porch of the house that had been mine and Marcus's, that was now gradually becoming mine and David's, that would always carry echoes of the love that had first filled it with life. You okay? David asked, knowing the anniversary was always hard despite the celebration. Yeah, I said, surprising myself with how true it was. I'm okay. I miss him. I'll always miss him, but I'm okay. He'd be proud, you know, of everything you've built, everything you've become. I hope so. But more than that, I hope I'm proud. I hope I'm building something authentic, not just performative. I hope the work matters beyond just being a memorial. It does, David said firmly. The students whose lives are changing, the community members who have access to art and creativity, the families living in affordable housing that was designed with dignity. They're not abstractions or metrics. They're real people whose lives are tangibly better because of what you and Marcus started. I leaned into him, grateful for his presence, his patience, his understanding that I would always carry Marcus with me, while also building something new. Love builds wealth deeper than money, I said softly. What's that? Something Marcus used to say, something I'm still learning to fully understand. I looked out at the neighborhood, at the life continuing around us, at the future still unfolding despite the past's losses. It means that the wealth that matters isn't what you own, it's what you create, what you give, what continues growing long after you're gone. It means that love is the foundation for everything meaningful we build. I like that, David said. It's a good way to live. Yeah, I agreed, watching the stars emerge in Atlanta's sky, feeling Marcus's presence in the work we'd done and the life I was still building. It is, and somewhere, I believed, Marcus was watching and smiling and proud, not because I'd preserved his memory perfectly, but because I'd taken what he'd taught me and used it to build something new, something growing, something that would outlast both of us and continue, creating opportunity and dignity and beauty for people we'd never meet. Love builds wealth deeper than money. I finally understood.